I used to believe that the people who raised you were the ones who'd always catch you, but what if the worst betrayal isn't the one that comes from a stranger? It's the one that's been living under the same roof as your secrets. My name is Elise. I'm 31 years old, and I teach second grade at a public school in Raleigh, North Carolina. I know how to read a room. I know when a child is struggling before they raise their hand. I've spent years learning how to pay attention to the quiet signals people send when they don't know how to ask for help. And still, I missed every single sign that my own husband was building a case against me. It started the way most quiet disasters do, not with an explosion, but with a shift. A slight cooling in the air, the way he started leaving for work 15 minutes earlier than usual. The way he'd stop mid-sentence when I walked into a room, then finish whatever he was saying to his phone screen instead. I told myself he was stressed. He'd been up for a promotion at the firm, something he'd been chasing for 2 years. I gave him space. I gave him benefit of the doubt. I gave him everything I had, and I kept giving even when I had nothing left. I found out I was pregnant on a Tuesday morning in March. I was alone in the upstairs bathroom, sitting on the edge of the tub in my socks, staring at the test the way you stare at something you were afraid to want. 2 lines. Clear. Certain. My hands weren't shaking. I just sat there for a long time, very still, feeling something bloom in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. Hope. We hadn't been trying exactly, but we hadn't been not trying either. It was one of those conversations we kept having and then not finishing. Someday. When things settle down, when the timing is better. I knew there was never going to be a perfect time, but I hadn't expected now. I didn't tell him that night. I told myself I wanted to wait until I saw a doctor. Wanted confirmation. Wanted a plan. But the truth was something I couldn't quite name yet. Something in me didn't feel safe sharing it. My mother called that Friday, the way she always did, right in the middle of me trying to grade spelling tests. Her voice was warm and a little too bright, the way it gets when she's fishing for something. She mentioned that my husband had called her earlier that week. "Just checking in," she said. "That's sweet, right?" I agreed. I said yes, that's sweet. I hung up and sat with that for a long time. He hadn't mentioned calling her. And my husband didn't call my mother to chat. He barely spoke to her at family dinners. The following Saturday, I was clearing out the junk drawer in the kitchen when I found a folded printout tucked behind a stack of expired coupons. It was from a legal website. The header read, "How to establish grounds for divorce based on psychological instability." There were highlights in yellow marker. My husband's handwriting in the margins. Documentation. Pattern of behavior. Witnesses. I stood in the kitchen holding that paper for so long that the refrigerator compressor cycled on and off twice. Then I folded it back exactly the way I found it, put it under the coupons, and closed the drawer. I went upstairs. I sat on the bathroom floor. I placed my hand flat against my stomach and I whispered, "I'm going to figure this out. I just need a little more time." By the following week, I had scheduled my OB appointment and told no one. Not my husband, not my mother, not my best friend who'd been asking about kids since our college graduation. Just me and a receptionist named whoever answered the phone at 8 a.m. I had started keeping a small notebook in my car, tucked under the seat. Dates. Things I noticed. Timestamps. My sister called the night before my appointment. She's 2 years younger than me. Lives 20 minutes away. Works in pharmaceutical sales. She and my husband have always gotten along well, too well, maybe, in the way that makes you feel like you're always just slightly outside of a joke you didn't hear the beginning of. She wanted to have dinner that weekend. Family thing at my parents' house. She said everyone had been asking about us. She said my husband seemed tired lately. Did I know he'd reached out to her too? I asked her what he'd said. She laughed it off. Nothing, just checking in. You know how he is. I didn't actually. Not anywhere. I went to my appointment alone. The doctor confirmed everything. She walked me through early prenatal care, asked about my stress levels, reminded me to get sleep. When I mentioned that I hadn't told my husband yet, she didn't push. She just said, "Whenever you're ready." On the drive home, I sat in the parking garage for 12 minutes before I could make myself move. I wasn't crying, I was calculating. That evening, my husband came home carrying takeout from the Thai place downtown, which he only did when he felt guilty about something. He was cheerful in that careful way, asking about my day, pouring me water without being asked, complimenting the way I'd rearranged the bookshelf. I watched him the way I watch kids in my classroom when I know something's wrong. The performance was good. It wasn't real. After dinner, he mentioned the family gathering, said it would be good for us to go. Said it had been a while since we'd shown up for anything and people were starting to notice. I said okay. I said I'd think about what to bring. He nodded and went upstairs to take a shower, and I opened the drawer and photographed the printout with my phone. The dinner was at my parents' house the following Sunday. My mother had made her pot roast. The house smelled like rosemary and something baked, and everyone was doing that thing families do, where they perform normalcy at each other hard enough that it starts to look like theatre. My sister arrived with a bottle of wine she'd clearly grabbed from a gas station, and she handed it to my mother like it was a gift from a vineyard. My husband laughed at the joke and touched her shoulder when he did, and I stood by the kitchen counter watching that small thing and feeling a coldness I didn't have a name for yet. At some point in the evening, I stepped away to use the bathroom. When I came back, the conversation at the table had shifted. My mother was saying something about how she'd been a little worried about me lately. My husband had his hands folded on the table, listening, nodding, the picture of concern. I stood in the doorway for a moment before anyone noticed me. My mother said, "You seem so withdrawn. Are you sleeping okay?" My husband looked up then and met my eyes. His expression didn't change. He said, "I've been worried too." My sister refilled her wine. That was the moment. Not the document in the drawer, not the phone calls, not the careful cheerfulness with takeout. That moment, standing in my parents' doorway while my husband used my mother's concern as a brick in a wall he was building around me. I sat down. I joined the conversation. I smiled where smiling was called for. And when my husband reached over and put his hand over mine on the tablecloth for the benefit of the room, I didn't pull away. But that night, when we got home and he went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I navigated to my school district's employee assistance portal. I had 3 sessions of free counselling I'd never used. I scheduled the first one for that Wednesday. Then I opened a new encrypted note on my phone and started typing every detail of that dinner from memory. Who said what? What time? What expression? The following week unravelled fast. On Monday, I got a call from my principal. She wanted to meet Wednesday morning before school. Her voice was careful in a way that made my stomach drop. I asked if everything was okay. She said she just wanted to check in. I didn't sleep Monday night. Wednesday came. I sat across from my principal in her office with the door closed and a box of tissues on the desk between us. She said she had received an anonymous concern. Someone who cared about me had reached out to the district's wellness coordinator expressing worry about my mental and emotional stability. There had been mention of erratic behaviour at home, difficulty coping, a suggestion that I might benefit from a leave of absence. She was kind. She was genuinely kind about it. She said she wasn't taking any action. She just wanted to give me the chance to speak for myself. I looked at her and said, "I'd like to know if this contact came from someone connected to my husband." She went very still. I said, "I'm asking because I have reason to believe I am being systematically discredited by my spouse in preparation for a legal action against me." I said it calmly. I practiced it in the car. She said she couldn't share details of the contact. But she didn't say no. I thanked her for telling me. I walked to my classroom. I taught 17 second graders how to write a complete sentence. I did not cry until I was in my car in the parking lot at 3:47 p.m. That evening, I called a family law attorney in Durham whose name I'd found through the State Bar Association website. I told her I needed to understand my rights before I took any action. She asked me to bring documentation. I had already started a folder. The next few days had a strange quality to them, like walking through water. My husband was home more than usual, pleasant in that same careful way, making coffee in the morning and asking what I wanted for dinner. My sister texted twice to check in. My mother called to say she'd been thinking about me. I responded to all of it warmly. I kept my voice even. I kept my notebook under the car seat and added to it every night. What I hadn't told anyone, what I hadn't let myself fully land on, was that I was still pregnant. 8 weeks along, tired in the mornings, careful about what I ate, taking my prenatal vitamins at night when my husband was already asleep. The pregnancy felt like a secret I was keeping from a threat I hadn't fully named yet. On Thursday night, my husband told me he wanted to go see his parents that weekend, dinner at their place in Carrie. He said his mother had been asking about us. He said it would be good to show up. I said I'd go. I didn't say anything else. Saturday evening, his parents' house is a split level on a cul-de-sac, the kind of neighbourhood where everyone has a Ring doorbell and a strong opinion about lawn care. His mother had set the table with cloth napkins, which she only did when she was making a point. His father sat in the same chair he always sat in. My sister had been invited, which I found out when I saw her car in the driveway. The first hour was fine, conversation about nothing, his cousin's new job, whether the deck needed resealing, something about a neighbour's dog. My husband played the role of attentive son. I played the role of attentive wife. My sister ate 2 servings of the pasta and complimented his mother's cooking 3 times, which was 2 more than she usually did. After dinner, the men went out to look at the deck and his mother started clearing plates. My sister helped. I stood to help too, but his mother said, "Oh, sit, you look tired. I've been worried about you." My sister laughed softly in agreement. I sat. His mother set down a serving dish and said, "Elise, we all love you. You know that." She used the voice she uses when she thinks she's being gentle. But sometimes love means asking hard questions. Is there anything you've been keeping from your husband? Anything you've been... She searched for the word, managing alone. My sister was watching me from across the kitchen island. Her eyes were steady. She knew what was coming. I set my hands flat on the table. I said, "I'm pregnant." The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Then my sister laughed. It wasn't a surprise laugh. It was a small, disbelieving sound, the kind you make when someone says something you were already prepared to hear but were hoping they wouldn't say. She said, "Elise." I said, "I'm 8 weeks. I have a confirmation from my OB. I have the paperwork." His mother's expression didn't do what I expected it to. It didn't soften. She looked at my sister, and something passed between them that I would spend weeks replaying. Then she looked back at me and said slowly, "That's quite a claim to make right now. Given everything." I didn't ask what everything meant. I already knew. My husband came back in from the deck, his father right behind him. He looked at his mother's face and then at mine, and then he said, "What's going on?" His mother said, "Your wife just told us she's pregnant." He didn't look surprised. He tilted his head the way he does when he's calculating something. Then he said very quietly, "We can talk about this at home." My sister said nothing. She was looking at her wine glass. I got my purse. I said, "I'm leaving." I said it to the room. I didn't say goodnight to anyone individually. I walked out through the garage the way we'd come in. He followed me to the car. He put his hand on the door before I could open it and he said, "Just stop. Just wait. Let's talk." His voice was low and tight. He said, "You're not thinking clearly." He said, "We need to handle this quietly." He said, "You know how this looks." I looked at him. I said, "Let go of the door." He didn't move. He leaned in closer. He said, "I'm going to get you help. This has gone far enough." And then his hand was on my arm, not grabbing but pressing, insistent, the way you press something you're trying to contain. And I stepped back and my heel caught the edge of the driveway curb, the concrete lip where the pavement dropped 2 inches to the grass, and I went down. My hip hit the driveway and my wrist caught the fall, and I lay there in the dark on my in-laws' driveway with the motion-sensing light flickering on above me. He stood over me. He said, "Oh God, Elise." He said it like he was reading it from a script. From the garage doorway my sister watched. She didn't come forward. She had her arms crossed, her wine glass still in her hand, and on her face, in the half-second before she arranged it into something more appropriate, I saw it. Relief. Like a held breath finally let go. He drove me to Wake Med. We did not speak. He sat in the waiting room while a nurse took my vitals and a doctor ordered blood work and an ultrasound. When the doctor came back in, she looked at me directly, not at my husband who had followed us into the room. She said, "You're still pregnant. The baby is fine, but I want to ask you something privately." My husband stood up. She said, "Sir, I'm going to need about 5 minutes with my patient." He sat back down. She closed the door. She looked at me. She didn't ask me if I'd fallen. She said, "What happened tonight?" I told her. All of it, the document in the drawer, the call to the school, the dinner, what he said in the driveway. I said it in a voice that didn't shake because I was past shaking. I was somewhere on the other side of that. She wrote something on a chart. She said, "I'm going to make a note in your file. I'm also going to give you a number." She wrote it on a card and handed it to me. It was a DV resource line, the NC Family Violence Hotline. She said, "You don't have to be ready, you just have to save the number." I put it in my sock. Not my purse, my sock. He drove us home in silence. I went upstairs and sat in the bathroom for a long time, hand on my stomach, breathing. The next 2 weeks had their own rhythm. I went to work. I ate. I slept. I called my attorney. I called the counsellor through the EAP. I did not tell my mother or my sister anything new. I watched the way my sister moved through my life like she was comfortable there, like she had a key she'd been given without my knowledge. Every few days she'd text my husband something, a meme, a check-in. Once, a reference to a restaurant they'd apparently talked about trying. I screenshotted everything and sent it to my attorney. At my attorney's office, I spread the documentation across the conference table. The printed legal research from the drawer, photographed and time-stamped. The screenshot of my principal's calendar showing the meeting she'd called. A written statement from my principal, who, once she understood the full picture, agreed to document what she could. The recording I'd made on my phone of the conversation in his parents' kitchen. 14 screenshots of text between my sister and my husband, recovered from a shared tablet we'd bought 3 years ago that he'd forgotten I still had access to. My attorney was quiet for a moment after she reviewed it. Then she said, "This is significantly more than most people walk in with." I said, "I've been a second-grade teacher for 6 years. I know how to document." She laughed. Actually laughed. The next step was the part I'd been dreading. My husband had started telling people, his family, friends from the firm, a couple we'd been close to for years, that I was struggling, that I'd been making things up, that the pregnancy might not be real, or might not be what I claimed. He said it with concern, always with concern, the way you talk about someone you're worried about rather than someone you're trying to destroy. It was elegant, in a terrible way. By the time I said anything, there would already be a version of me in people's minds that he'd built without my permission. So I got ahead of it. I wrote a post, not anonymous, under my full name, with a photo posted to a community forum for women in the Triangle area that had about 40,000 members. I described what had been done to me, the document, the call to my school, the pattern. I did not accuse my sister explicitly, but I included the screenshots of her messages with my husband, redacted enough to be legal, clear enough to be understood. Within 6 hours, it had been shared over 2,000 times. My sister posted a response on her own Instagram. It was a long caption about family complexity and loving difficult people, and how sometimes the people we love create narratives that hurt those around them. She used the phrase "choosing peace" 4 times. The comments on her post were not what she'd expected. People were connecting dots. Someone screenshotted a post she'd made 3 months earlier, where she'd mentioned visiting my in-laws for dinner on a night she'd told me she was out of town for work. I watched it happen from my kitchen. I drank chamomile tea. My hands were steady. The formal process moved the way legal things move, slowly, then all at once. My attorney filed. My husband's attorney responded. There were hearings, documents, depositions. His attorney tried to argue psychological instability on my part, at which point my attorney introduced the recorded conversation in his parents' kitchen, the documented contact with my school, and a signed statement from my principal confirming the anonymous wellness complaint and its timing. The judge was a woman in her early 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain. She reviewed the materials without visible expression. When she spoke, it was carefully and without drama. She said the pattern of conduct described was consistent with coercive control. She said the contact with my employer was particularly concerning. She did not raise her voice. She didn't have to. My husband and I finalized the divorce 4 months later. I kept the house. I kept my job. I kept my daughter, who was born in October, 7 pounds 4 ounces, with her grandfather's nose and her own very specific opinion about sleeping past 5 a.m. My sister and I have not spoken since the night she stood in that garage doorway with her arms crossed. I thought I'd feel something more definitive when the silence between us became permanent. Grief, maybe, or anger, or the particular ache of missing someone who turned out not to be who you thought they were. I did feel all of those things. I felt them in waves for a long time, the way you feel weather coming before it arrives. But underneath all of it was something I hadn't expected. Clarity. The strange, clean relief of finally seeing the full picture. People ask me sometimes how I kept it together, how I didn't fall apart in the middle of all of it. I don't think I have a good answer because the truth isn't dramatic. I just kept going one day at a time. I taught my kids. I called my attorney. I added to my notebook. I put my hand on my stomach at night and made promises I intended to keep. I'm not telling this story because I want you to be angry on my behalf, though I understand if you are. I'm telling it because I spent a long time believing that if I stayed quiet enough and patient enough and good enough, the people around me would eventually see the truth on their own. They didn't. The truth had to be carried in folders and documented in timestamps and spoken clearly in a judge's courtroom before anyone was obligated to listen. I was not crazy. I was not unstable. I was not unstable. I was not making things up. And I stopped waiting for permission to say so. If you have ever been told that your reality is not real, by a partner, by a sibling, by anyone who was supposed to love you, I want you to know that keeping records is not paranoia. It's preparation. And knowing when to speak is not weakness. It's the whole thing. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Tell me what part of this hit home. And if there's something you've been carrying that you haven't said out loud yet, I believe you. There's something I keep coming back to, even now. The image of my husband standing over me in that driveway, saying, "Oh God, Elise," in a voice that had nothing real in it. He had rehearsed concern the way some people rehearse apologies. He knew all the right sounds and none of the right reasons to make them. And for a long time, I had let that performance substitute for the real thing. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with. Not what he did. What I kept excusing. I think about the choices people make when they believe no one is paying attention. My husband made his choices carefully, over months. The legal printout, the call to my school, the dinner table conversations with my mother, where he wore worry like a costume. My sister made hers too. Every time she laughed at something she should have questioned, every time she stood in a doorway with her arms crossed instead of asking if I was okay. They both believed that the quieter they kept me, the safer they were. What they miscalculated was that quiet doesn't mean blind. I was paying attention to every single thing. There's a kind of intelligence that doesn't come from being the smartest person in the room. It comes from deciding that the truth is worth the trouble of finding it. That means looking at the uncomfortable things directly. It means not flinching when the document in the drawer says something you are hoping it wouldn't. It means writing down dates and times when everyone around you is pretending nothing is happening. I wasn't strategic because I was cold. I was strategic because I understood, somewhere deep and steady, that my daughter was going to need me to be someone who didn't look away. What my husband never understood about me, what my sister never understood about me, what my sister never understood either, is that caring about doing the right thing isn't weakness. It's load-bearing. It's what holds everything else up. I could have leaked information I wasn't supposed to have. I could have burned things down in ways that would have felt good for about 48 hours and cost me everything afterward. I didn't, because how you get through something matters as much as whether you get through it. I wanted to come out of this as someone my daughter could be proud of. That meant I had to be honest even when dishonesty would have been faster. And then there was just the matter of not stopping, not on the hard days, not on the days when I sat in my car in the school parking lot and couldn't make myself go back inside. Not on the days when I genuinely didn't know if anyone was going to believe me. Endurance isn't dramatic. It doesn't look like anything from the outside. It just looks like a woman eating her lunch and grading her papers and adding one more entry to a notebook under her car seat. That's what it actually is. The decision to keep going made over and over again in very small, very ordinary moments. The cause and effect of this story isn't complicated, even though living it felt like it was. They chose to treat my reality as something they could edit. I chose to document it instead of disappear. Those two choices, made over the same period of time, led to two very different places. That's not luck. That's just what happens when people underestimate someone who has decided she's done being underestimated. My daughter is 7 months old. She doesn't know any of this yet. Someday she will. And when she asks me what I did, I want to be able to tell her the truth. That I was scared and I did it anyway. That I was alone and I kept good records. That I wasn't sure anyone would believe me and I spoke clearly regardless. Those three things, I think, are what got us here.